You are now tuned in to Global Weekly Headlines, Wednesdays at 5 a.m. on Thoughts Express TV. I'm your host, McRob. Let's talk news.
All right, good morning. It is Wednesday, November 19th, and we're back with a fresh episode of Global Weekly Rundown here on Thoughts Express TV. I'm your host, McRob, and today we're breaking down the biggest stories shaping our world over the past week leading up to November 18th, which is yesterday. All right, don't forget to click that subscribe button, click that like button. This way you'll be in tune whenever we drop new content. So as you know, every week we connect the dots between world events, human experiences, and, deeper meaning behind the headlines. Because news isn't just information, it's insight, it's impact, and it's also perspective. So let's get into this week's Global Rundown. All right, so this week, the Middle East remained at the center of the world's attention as diplomacy and warfare unfolded side by side, right? So the United Nations Security Council approved a U.S.-backed peace plan for post-Gaza war, which is a plan that includes, formation of an international stabilization force to secure the territory once hostilities end. Now, while that diplomacy was happening in New York, the ground reality remained tense. Israel actually launched airstrikes in southern Lebanon, killing at least 12 people, as of what they confirm up to press time. All right. And a car ramming and stabbing attack in the West Bank also left one person dead and several injured. So the Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly congratulated President Trump on pushing forward the plan, yet continues to reject the full idea of full Palestinian statehood. So what does all of this mean, right? It means diplomacy is moving, but conflict on the ground hasn't slowed. There's a gap, and it's a very real gap, if you ask me, between policy and reality, right? And if that gap isn't closed, the peace plan may go down as another document that's just overshadowed by violence, right? So this is a reminder of how fragile peace can be and how urgent it is to align political tensions with, humanitarian realities. All right, so moving right along. On the economic front, global markets took another hit this week. The U.S. stock market dipped nearly 1%, and the VIX, which is the volatility index, jumped to a one-month high. Tech stocks led the downturn, with Nvidia dropping sharply after Peter Thiel's hedge fund disclosed it had exited its stake completely. Meanwhile, Bitcoin slid below 90,000. That was a big jump because it went up to, I think, about 115,000 the last time I checked. And this is the first time it's done so since April, sending crypto investors into risk-off mode. Australia also wasn't spared either because the ASX lost about 60 billion Australia dollars in market value, and that was just in one single session, which adds global fears, of a broader economic slowdown. So as someone working in banking and finance, I'll tell you this: volatility isn't just numbers on a screen. It affects real people, their loans, their savings, their confidence, and their willingness to take financial risks. And for creators like myself and digital entrepreneurs, economic swings can directly influence monetization, ad revenue, and even your content performance. The world is shifting, and everyone from Wall Street to Main Street is feeling the tremors. All right. Moving right along. This week, Brazil hosted COP30, and the tone was extremely clear. Climate justice is no longer a side conversation. It is the conversation, right? Leaders from across the global south demanded real commitments, not symbolic ones. Funding for climate resilience remains a major issue, especially as, some developed nations scale back climate aid programs. Indigenous leaders actually delivered a powerful message. They stated that you cannot protect this earth while excluding the people who protect its roots. There was also renewed international pressure to phase out fossil fuels, as I discussed a few weeks ago in one of my previous videos, especially controversial given Brazil's own push to expand oil and gas drilling. COP30 exposed, the contradictions, the tensions, but also the urgency. Climate change isn't theoretical anymore. It's hurricanes, it's floods, droughts, displacements, things the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, and the US experienced all this year. And as always, the poorest communities pay the highest price. This is a global justice issue, economically, socially, and morally. All right, moving right along. In Europe, security agencies sounded alarms this week. The UK's Domestic Intelligence Service, M15, issued a direct warning. So Chinese-linked operatives are using LinkedIn and professional networking platforms to target and potentially recruit British lawmakers and government staff. So this is in essence, a modern espionage. It's digital, quiet, disguised as opportunity, disguised as networking. Meanwhile, in Poland, authorities arrested 2 Ukrainian nationals accused of cooperating with Russian intelligence in an attempted railway sabotage plot. It's a reminder that geopolitical rivalry doesn't always look like, military conflict. Sometimes it looks like hacking. Sometimes it looks like fake profiles. Sometimes it looks like everyday people, being pulled into new shadow wars. For all of us, individuals, organizations, banks, creators, digital security is no longer optional. It's definitely essential. Moving right along. Latin America made waves this week. So Chile is entering what many analysts call its most polarized election in decades, with right-wing candidate Jose Antonio Cast and left-wing candidate Jeanette Jara battling for the presidency. In Brazil, the government faces heavy criticism for pushing oil expansion even as, it touts reduced deforestation. So environmental groups argue that the country can't lead climate conversations while simultaneously deepening, its fossil fuel commitments. This reflects a wider tension right across the region. Economic need versus environmental responsibility, rapid development versus long-term sustainability. As I have mentioned in a previous video, fossil fuels have helped us to get to where we are now, but the long-term impact and dangers, and weather implications that it has is far more, detrimental. So Latin America finds itself at the crossroads, and the choices it makes will echo globally. All right. Here are a few more notable stories from around the world this week. The Australian Securities Exchange suffered a massive $60 billion wipeout amid market instability. In Bangladesh, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina received a death sentence, sending shockwaves throughout Asia. In Nigeria, one of the girls that was abducted from a school dormitory in Kebbi State managed to escape and was reunited with her family. The global weather community reported unusual temperature swings across multiple continents, raising fears of another intense winter season. So a lot is happening, and each story is a reminder of how interconnected the world really is. And that wraps up this week's edition of Global Weekly Rundown. So we covered conflict and diplomacy, economic uncertainty, the climate crisis, geopolitical espionage, and political shifts across continents, right? Every headline tells a story. Every story affects a life. And every week, we try to make sense of the chaos together. So if you found this breakdown useful, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, we drop these every Wednesday at 5 a.m. sharp. It's your host, McRob. Stay informed, stay aware, stay resilient. And as always, remember, you didn't break. You just outgrew what was holding you back. Peace.